right. Let's talk a little bit about LSP, and yeah, I don't know, maybe introduce yourself a little bit more, talk about how you got involved with LSP, and then I think we can sort of, just go over an overview of LSP with people.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm Michael, mjlbach on GitHub, Timesweeper on Reddit, so now you can all link the blame. Most commonly known for yelling at people about asking when 0.5 is coming out, but realistically spending a lot of time working on LSP config and the LSP client in general in Neovim. I've been a Vim user for like ever. It was like one of my first text editors, and then I switched to Neovim like pretty much as soon as it came out.
Yeah.
And I really only got interested in developing core in like a year ago, I'd say. Mostly doing like small PRs to the LSP config, and then gradually I was like, hey, actually we're still missing a couple features.
Yep.
The client's great, but we should, I should start filing things in core. And then I don't know why suddenly they started trusting me to start merging things, and then chaos ensued.
Yeah, it was a big long con by me to get Michael to take over all my work on LSP, and it's been working super well.
I know, TJ, you need to teach me how to do that con so I can get someone else to take over my work.
Chat wants to know if that's a silk shirt.
It is.
Oh, nice.
I think it is.
All of chat is really missing BeaconBot and his silk shirt these days, so they're proud of you.
I don't know who BeaconBot is.
That's okay. That's okay. He's a silk shirt streamer.
He has great taste.
Yeah, he does have great taste. Someone asked, I keep seeing in the question, I'll just answer this quickly. We do not control the apt-get thing. You'd have to talk to the people who own that distribution and other things like that. That's not us. So, anyways, that's just a side note. So, let's talk about LSP. Let's talk about LSP. Maybe just give us a brief sort of overview of like, what is LSP? Why are we excited about it? Why did we put it into Neovim core? Just some info like that.
So can I share my screen? Is that going to work?
Yeah, it should work. Okay, cool. That's hopefully,
Let's try this. Okay, can everyone see this?
And yes, they can see.
Okay. So back in the day, like when I started using Vim, each IDE would kind of have like its own siloed language tooling. So you'd hear a lot of people say like, if you want to use Java, you need to use IntelliJ, or like Visual Studio has the best C++ support. And that's because every IDE had its own like encapsulated language toolset that would not be shared across editors, which meant there was a lot of duplication of effort. And then for something like Vim or Neovim, there's basically like small efforts to replicate that functionality, but just really wasn't comparable. And then plugins like uComplete.me came out that had like their own like daemonized sort of language analysis tools coupled with an auto-completion plugin, but it was still like an independent development from something like Visual Studio. And VS Code, the editor of champions, came out and introduced this concept.
Chat wants you to zoom in a bit, so I don't know if you can make it quite a bit bigger if possible.
Oh man, how do I, oops. Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better. Chat's gonna be happier now.
Okay, so VS Code came out with this idea, which is basically Microsoft trying to distribute a lot of work of saying, let's create these independent language servers, which are text editor and IDE independent. And in order to communicate with these, and what a language server is it's just a program, right? It's just an application that runs as like a server on your computer that parses your code base, analyzes it, provides a syntax tree, and provides operations that operate, modify, and give you statistics on that syntax tree. So it will give you things like complete at point. It'll give you definitions and documentation on symbols. And we'll go through what these functionalities are later. But in order to communicate with that language server, they introduced this thing called Language Server Protocol, which is a Json Rpc standard for communication. So now you have things like different IDEs can actually communicate with the language server, and then the development is handled either by the language community in the case of something like ClangD, or maybe by like Microsoft itself in the case of like TS Server. And this is great because it lets Neovim use the exact same language server that VS Code, that maybe even IntelliJ or Visual Studio would use. So that you have great community projects like Rust Analyzer, for example, that provide basically like IDE class support, but now it's something that we get sort of for free. So in Neovim, we have this implementation of a Json Rpc client that communicates with these language servers. And this is an example of the sort of things we send. It's really easy to actually read these once you understand the protocol. I'll admit the documentation is kind of arcane. But like when you stare at it enough, it makes sense. It's just these JSON messages. It'll usually include this params area, which will specify the text document, and then the thing that you're requesting, which in this case is a definition, and then a buffer position, which, like, albeit is a little confusing because of the 1-0 indexing with Lua, but it's really not that bad. And then you'll get back a response, which might be like, you know, the range that you want to highlight, the actual text of the definition, and then that is handled by our client to display it to you. So language servers offer a ton of features. I actually don't use the majority of the features.
Do you know if your mic's clipping a little bit at the top? I don't know if
no.
I don't know, or you just either need to talk slightly quieter. But I think it's okay. Yeah. So just a few clarification points as well while you're playing with that. Someone asked if you need to install Neovim and VS Code for something like this. No. They're separate executables that are running. Like Michael said, they're just literally a program that talks JSON to each other. Like, hey, do you know LSP? And they're like, yeah, I know LSP. And then they just talk to each other. That's it. There's nothing crazy. You don't need VS Code. You don't need anything else like that. It just works like that. And Sabine, how you even asked, what about a real server as LSP? Yeah, you could have your LSP running on some big, beefy 64 cores thing sitting, you know, in your back at home and connecting over, you know, TCP or something with LSP. It's just a JSON talking back and forth. So, anyways, you may proceed. You may proceed.
I'll try to make sure my volume is better.
That sounds better now. Yeah.
Yeah, I just lower down the settings.
Cool.
So I think the most common feature that people would use, I would argue, is the completion results. And just to clarify, when we talk about completion, there's client-side completion, which is like auto-completion or omnifunc, which is our Vim's built-in complete at point system. But then what we're talking about with language server is they actually provide the completion results, which are consumed by either the plugin or omnifunc. So you don't get auto-completion for free. That's still something that has to be implemented client-side. So completion, hover, which is like when you click on a symbol, you can trigger a hover, which shows a nice doc string about what the function or symbol is. Signature help, which gives you the like function signature, so you can know what the arguments the function could or optionally take. And then definition, I would argue, is probably like one of the most popular ones. So this will let you jump to a definition of a symbol across your entire code base. And there are still a lot of other great features. They provide highlight support, so things like if you're on a symbol and you want to see where that symbol is mentioned in other parts of your code, you can set up an auto command for this. We have an example of this in LSP config. References, as TJ told me last night, is really useful for navigating in large code bases. Code actions are something really used. But this is really popular in like the TypeScript community for doing like automated refactoring or imports of parts of your code. CodeLens is something we actually just recently added, but this is kind of like if you do Rust Analyzer or Haskell, this is very popular. It can let you do like run tests, for example, within your code, like unit tests. It basically is like inserts small pieces of virtual text with like runnable actions. And then I think the other really popular one is formatting. LSP provides a unified interface for formatting. So you could use something like formatter nvim, for example, which calls an external formatting tool. But a lot of language servers actually come in with built-in integrations with some formatting client. Like Haskell uses Ormelu. I think that's how you pronounce it. Never actually said that out loud. And then Rust Analyzer has like Rust format, so you don't have to worry about setting up a formatting client. And then there's other things like rename, call hierarchies, which let you know what is calling your code and what your code is calling. And we don't have support for semantic tokens yet, but this can give you semantic highlighting like Semsheet if you set it up. And Smoke is actually working on PR for that. That's been in progress. But yeah, it's just a ton of really exciting features. I don't actually know what monikers are, but I'm sure TJ knows because it's an LSIF thing.
Yeah, it's just a unique way to reference a particular, basically like item across depends on your scope, but sometimes sort of like universally. So like it would be like package, file, line, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading about it, and it seems interesting. I don't know what the future of LSIF is. If that's going to be something that becomes something our client could eventually consume.
I have plans.
It seems really cool, especially for people working on large code bases.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's what LSP config can do, or LSP can do. Let's talk a little bit just about the structure of Neovim and LSP config. So we have this plugin LSP config, which is a companion to the built-in language client. Basically, none of the logic of the client is in LSP config. What LSP config does for you is that every language server requires like a little bit of tuning. There are some specific settings we have to pass to like tell it what your project is like, give it some initialization options for sane defaults. So you can think of it like Polyglot in a way, except for language server settings. Except we're very unopinionated. We basically give you the minimum that you need to have the language server start up and start like indexing your project appropriately. So we also, that's like one of the things we do is we have settings for each language server. The second thing is an auto command that launches the language server based on the file type and detecting a root directory, so we know you're in a real project. And this is like kind of the area people get tripped up on, but it's very important for a language server to know of your project is, so it knows which files to index. So we try to automatically detect this for you, and we have some rules that you can look at that are very easy for you to override if you need to. We also have documentation for each language, including how to like get started, how to install them, which is a prerequisite. But in the vast majority of cases, something like the Arch user repository, Nix packages, npm, PyPy are going to have the binary server. So it takes probably about 30 seconds to install most servers. And if you really don't want to install your server, there's something like Neovim LSP install, which is a community plugin that will automatically handle them for you. So yeah, there's also this like, so people ask a lot about comparisons like Conquer of Completion in this respect. So LSP config has like something like 70 plus language server configurations right now. But we try to only implement things that are on the spec. But many servers have started to add their own custom like JSON response requests. So things like Neovim Metals or JDTLS, which are plugins by the community, have actually gone and started implementing off-spec customizations to the language server and don't actually need LSP config. They have their own logic for launching language server, or launching the language server, and they have their own like custom setup. So if you can, you should prefer using one of these like language-specific plugins for your language of choice. But they're not. They don't complementary thing. It's kind of like how COC Pyrite, for example, provides additional functionality on Pyrite. So I'm expecting that with the release of 0.5, we're going to have a lot of these language-specific plugins come out that provide like a really tailored experience for your language. And then we already have this kind of with like Neovim Rust tools, and there's like a TypeScript tools now that came out recently. So it's pretty exciting seeing what people are extending the built-in language server. People ask a lot of times like how you actually use a lot of this functionality we expose, and you can look at the documentation for help bim.lsp.buff, and you can see basically all of the things that are available for you to map. Most of these are pretty easy. They don't even take like any arguments. If you look in the LSP config README, we actually have like recommended keybinds to map all these functions. But this is basically the functions that we provide that call requests to the language server that then we provide a set of handlers, which when the server responds, those handlers will execute and then provide either the hover window or the highlight or the rename functionality. So if you're interested, you can go through, read the help for all of these different functions and see exactly what they do. And also the customization that's available to
And if there's one missing, feel free to implement it.
Yeah,
and send a PR.
Happy to review PRs. A lot of times, people ask like, why don't we have X implemented? And the reality is because like I often don't use more than like the diagnostics and completion. So I'm not even like aware that there is some really cool niche functionality that's useful to you. So if you are really invested in that, filing a PR is the best way to get it in core. We've actually gotten really good recently, mostly because I've had more time at merging new functions. And yeah, I'm happy to also walk people through how to do PRs. I know Folk has done a lot of really great work recently overhauling our hover windows, which thank you. Like that was something I was not particularly interested in. So yeah, there's lots of opportunity to clean up the experience for the built-in client. I think it's great now, but if you have an opinion or some ideas for improving it, open an issue, post on the discourse, reach out on Matrix. We'll talk about it. We can walk you through how to actually file the PR. Really excited for more people to start contributing to both LSP config and the built-in client.
Yeah, I think like even just, opening up an issue and saying like, I'd like to do this, what do I need to do? Or searching issues for, it works generally, I think, quite like that. You can just ask, and some people linked earlier in the chat, like I've got a command for origin. Oh, thank you, Stupak, which is my very first Neovim PR, which was a long time ago, and it was so that you could have multiple sections in your status line, and they would like center and stuff. And like Justin was super helpful on the PR, and like Hins was there, and a bunch of other people. I was like, that's how I got started. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I just was like, yeah, sure. I mean, these people are nice, and I had fun. I'm gonna keep doing this, and then now I'm here. Just one step at a time.
I mean, talking about like my experience getting started, it was really like it was Matt at Tito, it was like Bfred, it was like there were a lot of people who would give me like advice and like catch mistakes that I made while I would kind of got my feet wet with the code base. And it's a really great experience contributing. This is like the first open source project that I've taken like any sort of like long-term active development role in. And it's just been a great experience. So I encourage everyone, like if you're looking for an open source project to contribute to, I think we make it really easy and really fun.
Yeah.
Just to get back to a little bit more questions about the built-in client, I'm almost done. So we get a lot of questions like why we built this. And I would argue that like I don't know why we wouldn't. Love is like basically the perfect framework for building a language server client. It's this, if you don't know, Love is Lua binding, like something that's primarily developed for like Node, but it's not a JavaScript library, don't worry. It's a library that provides a sort of asynchronous event loop amongst other things, along with a lot of great like file system functionality and whatnot that allows us to implement an asynchronous callback mechanism that makes our language server client very performant. It's basically when you send out a request, there's basically like no cost waiting for it. Also, Lua JIT is very fast, and it's an extraordinarily fast language. It's sometimes as fast as C, depending on the scenario. And it's built right into Neovim. You don't have to worry about this. You don't, especially, I see a lot of people like saying like, oh, I need to install the right Lua JIT on my system. No, it's like embedded in Neovim. Like Neovim launches its own interpreter. So don't worry about that. And also the third aspect I'd say, which is great about our client, is it's virtually entirely overwritable. Every handler and every request that you can make, you can write your own. So if you don't like that the communication or that the hover documentation shows up in a floating window, just like overwrite it. So I didn't actually write the appropriate function to overwrite it, but you would put something like this in init.vim your doc or in an init.lua and just change this like open floating preview to open sidebar or print in status line. It's very easy, and then it doesn't even matter what we do in core. You have your own hover function now. And then the last area that I'd say is really cool about our client is that we're seeing a lot of plugins come up that extend the functionality and sort of address like UI or UX differences that people would prefer. So like we don't offer auto completion in Neovim. We only offer manual like triggered completion with OmniFunc. So NVim Comp B has an auto completion source that uses the LSP result. There's also this RayX's signature X, which provides like a sticky float or a sticky signature window. So as soon as you trigger like you would put a parentheses to start typing the function argument. It'll pop up the function signature with the highlighted function or argument you're typing.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, as I mentioned, Rust tools, which provides a lot of extension of our client. Flutter tools, we do Flutter development. It's just really exciting seeing all of the cool things people are building.
And trouble.nvim, of course. You know, we can't.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. There we go. Problem fixed. And then another thing that comes up is people ask, like, why should we use servers, Conqueror Completion, Dim LSP, and like, I think if you're asking this question, just like stick with what you're using. You know, we're just another option. I think that if you see the appeal of this, like performance, the extensibility, the customizability, you'll know. It's also built right into our client. So I think that we have a compelling reason to use the built-in client. We have a lot of happy people. It's getting better every day. So I think it's a great time to hop on with the 0.5 release and start contributing. And then lastly, the couple of things are like, where's the auto-completion, where's snippets? These are the things that get asked a lot on like Reddit. Well, we don't have an auto-completion mechanism instead. That's not something in core, so you need a plugin for that. The language servers provide the completion results. You still need something to automatically trigger the completion pop-up. Snippets is also something not in core, but there's discussion about that. We do provide like some basic primitive snippet expansion in the OmniFunc, but you'll usually like Compy, for example, if you're using that, has integration with tons of snippet clients, Lua Snip, snippets.mvim. So that's pretty easy to set up. And then if you want auto-install language, the URL to get the plugin. It's very maintained, so I recommend that.
Yeah, there's also some cool ones coming out too. There's one called LSP Containers. I don't have the link offhand, but it
I saw that.
Yeah, it puts it all into like Docker images, which is pretty cool as well. So I think it's like I think, you know, this is a good example of where if we had just left LSP install in like our LSP config Neovim repo, people wouldn't be experimenting. People wouldn't be like pushing for new ideas or new ways of, you know, just be like, oh, well, this is how you LSP install. So I guess that's what I'm going to do, you know, but it's like, oh, some people are like, I don't want the server to touch my system. Sweet. Here's a way that you can make it so that it just installs into a Docker. Other people are like, no, I want it in my system because I have certain environment. Okay, cool. You know, like you're going to use what works well for you. So I think that's really exciting and sort of like a validation too of actually removing that feature from LSP config.
Yeah, I got a lot of flack for that. Yeah, I mean, so I'm a Nix user, and the LSP install functionality was basically worthless to me. Because Nix has like an immutable store where you have to put.
Yeah, by the way.
Yeah, Nix is becoming a meme. I need to find something to move on to. Anyway, so there are tons. I actually use Nix to manage my language servers. It's all declarative. I recommend checking it out. But basically every language server you want is packaged there, like EFM, TS Server, Rust Analyzer, HLS. So if you want to just get started with this and you're like, I don't want to think about configuring Neovim, I heard you and I made like an example, like 300 line starter config based on some feedback on Discourse. So you can check it out. It's mjlbach defaults.nvim. It's not meant to be like a framework. It's meant to be like, here's a really documented, good place to get started. It's not, it's kind of opinionated, but not super opinionated. I don't know. If you have like complaints, feel free to file them and maybe I'll read them. But yeah, so check it out, and like happy questions, especially on Discourse. So we have this, I'm going to plug Discourse for a second. Like, before we kind of had like, basically you could reach out on Matrix, IRC, or Reddit, or we had like GitHub discussions for a bit, but GitHub discussions are awful. Like no one would check them. And also like LSP config had like a separate GitHub discussions from like the main repo. So I made this Discourse, which has gotten like a ton of views, which I'm really happy about. But we have a dedicated language server section where like, I don't care how basic your question is, I will answer it. If you post a really basic question on GitHub, I'm going to click and say like, that's not what GitHub issues are for. If you post a really basic question on Discourse, I will spend like 30 minutes with you going through and like figuring out exactly what's wrong with you. So post your questions there. It should just work basically now. We have a lot of users, but happy to try figuring out ways to make the UX better. So yeah, that's about it. I have a live demo.
Ooh, live demo. Bold.
So,
I love
like,
it.
This is like just like rip source code. So like one thing people ask is like how you get a floating window. Is it the built-in client? Do you have to install LSP Saga? You don't. Our floating windows are actually really nice now, thanks to Folk. He did a lot. Like I did some initial work on Markdown rendering, but like so this is like an example of hover. You can do go to definition to jump somewhere else in your code base. You can do LSP info, which is like a nice floating window I wrote that gives some info about what clients to your current buffer. I'm trying to think, what do people want to see? You can do like signature help, Control K, but I'm not sure.
In insert mode, probably. I think because you have it mapped in insert mode.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if these ones have any.
I don't know what's if it actually works. But yeah, so that's the other thing to mention is some language servers don't actually implement all of the functionality. So sometimes something that you like, it's nothing we can really control client side.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just something to keep in mind. There's also code action. So for example, we can replace this iterator with for each, and that will automatically just work. You can also do things like rename. So we can change search to search test, and it will automatically adjust it across your code. Yeah, I mean, that's basically like the highlights of the LSP client. There's tons of functionality here that I don't even. Let's see, let's do incoming calls. Yeah, so we can like see what's calling args.walker anywhere in your code. Mm-hmm. So there's like just lots of really cool functionality people should explore. I know that there's like a lot of YouTube tutorials, but like you should also read the built-in documentation. It's really good. I wrote like a lot of it. Oops. So yeah, just do help bin.lsp.buff. Here's all the functions available to you. Take a read through the code base. It actually is super easy to parse. Mm-hmm. It'll probably take you like 10 minutes to read the help documentation, the LSP config readme, and that's like all you need to do, and then you'll be an LSP expert. Yeah, anyway, that's about it. So if anyone has any questions, I'm like happy to answer. But otherwise, yeah, super excited for people to start using this in 0.5's full release.
Yeah, I think Help LSP is a really good place for people to start as well, like you mentioned, just like starting at the top of that document just to understand what are our goals, what are we trying to do, why did we make certain, those are questions that we try and answer there and like work through. Yeah, I think it's really good to be doing that. And I think as well, it's been exciting to see lots of, like you mentioned, plugins integrating with it, which is sort of like a validation of like the framework style that we were going for, I think. Shout out, of course, I gotta do a little shout out to Telescope. Like I love using Telescope with LSP like at the same time to like look at references and find the thing that I'm doing, those kinds of stuff. It's been very, very exciting. Someone asked,
definitely
go ahead.
Use Telescope a lot.
Someone asked, how good is refactoring compared to IDEs? Well, if you're refactoring in like VS Code, it should be the same effectively for languages that don't do VS Code specific things. If you're doing like a rename, we're going to ask the LSP, okay, what do we need to rename? And it's going to send back a list of things to rename. Well, that list would be the same for us, or if it was sending it to VS Code. That's kind of the point, right? So I've been finding it very, very, I don't know, like easy and good to use. Like I've been using it in a pretty good sized Go like mono repo at my work, and like the rename just works across the mono repo, and I'm just like, cool. I'm all done with that now. So I think, so there's that. Some people are asking for your config for stuff, MJ. I don't know if you want to paste it in the chat.
I have a bunch of configs. So you can check out mjlbach nix.files for everything. That's like my personal stuff. And mjlbach defaults.mbim for basically like a less messy or opinionated version of my Neovim config, also with the Nix Flake if you want to try out Nix. Super easy to get started. I'm not a shill. I also see someone asked if my PhD was going to be in LSP development. No. Don't tell my advisors that. No, I mostly work on like robotics, body learning, machine learning stuff. Standard things.
Yeah, cool. Can you write a language server that is not separate process, like can use Nvim tree sitter functionality? So go ahead. You can give an answer. Yeah.
Yes, there's a really cool project. Okay, so it's null ls. I haven't like dug too much. Can I like, I guess I can just post a link in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a cool project. It basically leverages our RPC client, but with a local language server. So you can write like custom actions. I think like a lot of the functionality though, people ask for like this in-process language server is better served by us making our diagnostic API and our formatting API detached from the language server and a consumer of those language server results. But yeah, for now, this like null ls is a pretty cool project that lets you inject code actions and more, like just written via Lua, like in configuration. So I recommend checking it out.
Yeah, I also will say, if you will give away the part for running it in the same process, I think there's I've been working on a project for writing my own tree sitter grammar that's been doing a lot of kind of exciting stuff like on my end that I think is exciting, like generating Vim help docs from exported functions, things like that. My like long-term goal that I think would be quite interesting to explore is, could we create a tree sitter grammar good enough to understand each Lua file well, and then we write some glue code around that can basically answer the questions that you're asking, right? So now you're suddenly like, okay, I want to like go to the definition of this function. It looks at your file. It says, I see the thing you're accessing is the thing that's imported. So, okay, cool. And then boop. And then it like pulls you out to where that file would be. I think, you can use tree sitter because it's basically just a parsing library. You could do it to implement, some of the things. You just have to write code around tree sitter to do it. Tree sitter focuses primarily just on one file. And we'll talk about that shortly.
Yeah, something on the topic of tree sitter. I know we're like in the LSP segment, but tree sitter is really cool, and I know it's like technically beta for this release. But I wrote, like, I was actually inspired by TJ, and also inspired by people complaining that there was no help docs for LSP config, because I don't ever want to write Vim help, like ever. It's awful. I like Markdown. So I wrote a plugin that uses tree sitter parser for Markdown to parse the LSP config README and automatically convert it into Vim doc. It's called babblefish.mbim. It's awful right now because I wrote it like 4 hours after a conference deadline, like in the middle of the night, and then I like abandoned it. But I am going to come back to it at one point. It will convert Vim Markdown to Vim help. It will just do it with really bad formatting currently. So,
nice. But
that's just an example of like the cool functionality. Like this is all written in Neovim, like in Lua, with our tree sitter. There's no like, I didn't have to like import some like custom parser library.
Right.
So you can do really neat things. And actually, even if I had to, it'd be really easy with Packer to like pull an LPEG or something. So you can do really cool things with tree sitter, with Lua, with Neovim. It's basically like a full programming language in itself. So just like go have fun. Yeah.
And it's fast enough to actually do things, which is nice.
Yeah, like CERN uses it for simulations.
Right.
Still. So yeah. And if it's too slow, then if you are recommending Lua, embedded Lua JIT, you can write your own C functions and call them with the FFI. It's super, super easy to get started. Get Signs is a really good example of a plugin that leverages the FFI for like the fastest git diff status signs ever.
Yeah, it's very cool. And the interesting thing too is Lewis got a lot of it for free because Lewis just called the diff functions that exist inside of Neovim, which is awesome. It's like, oh well, if Neovim's diff parsing library got better, boom, Get Signs gets better, which is like really quite exciting, I think.
Yeah, and we actually, like, speaking of like the cool possibilities of like our show, Lua, like git signs, Lewis has a PR open adding Lua bindings built in like xdiff library. So soon we won't even need to use the FFI. You can directly call from Lua the built-in diff functionality Neovim, and we can just continue to expose all the functions that like you plugin authors might want to write extremely fast plugins.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things we came up earlier, like what's there between like vim.function and the Lua API.
Yeah.
One example is like everything from the Lua API can be called an async parallel callback.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are significant performance benefits avoiding going through vim script or vim.function.call.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of something that you want, just like let us know. It takes like maybe 10 to 15 minutes to map a new function.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Any I don't know if this is real Bram. I feel like I'm getting trolled. But if it's the real Bram, thanks for making Vim, and we're glad that you're here. And we love you. On that note, a cool thing is we merged, well, not really we. I don't know how much me and Michael did. Mostly Jane Lazo. There were around 1,000 Vim patches merged into Neovim since the last release, which I think is just awesome. As an example of why it's really cool to have a fork instead of a rewrite, is because when we work together, we send patches and ideas back to Vim, and we can merge things from Vim into Neovim. It's very exciting, very cool to be able to do that and sort of get those fixes and performance and shared, code base for free. And not for free, because Jane Lazo is just like doing all of the work amazingly awesome. But yeah.
TJ, I don't know if you saw that there was this like big thread that blew up on Reddit on our Vim, which was asking like why haven't people
Yeah, I commented on that and said stop doing these. This is stupid. But yes, I saw the the one, yeah.
It is really stupid, but also it's a big mischaracterization of our project, because if we get a patch that should be upstream to Vim, we tell people to go and do the work to submit it to Vim, so Vim gets better, and then we port the patch.
Right.
So it's not that like we only merge, like we're only working on these cool functionality like LSP and tree sitter.
Yeah.
It's that we do our own, like we extend the Neovim things that are different than Vim, like the windowing code. But it's something that's still shared with Vim. We just encourage people to submit the patch to Vim and then port it so that both editors benefit.
Yeah, definitely true. I think it's cool. And please stop posting dumb posts like that on Reddit, because it makes us sad, That's not really what we're looking to do. Cool. Any other questions for Michael? Otherwise, I've got a recorded interview with Vigu that I can play, and it's all about tree sitter, because Vigu couldn't make it today. Comment on Neorants. Say something about Neorants, yeah.
Okay, so Neorants is like This Week in KDE, but snarkier. And it's also not weekly, because I don't have time to do a weekly thing.
Mm-hmm.
But so Neorants is like my blog series post. It's like I actually do have one ready for 0.5. We had like a ton of changes though, and like I originally thought we were going to be 0.5 like basically very soon after I posted the first Neorant, so I wanted to not post one till after.
Yeah.
And then kind of lagged on a bit. But yeah, so Neorant's on my blog. Neovim, there's an RSS feed. You can check it out. Basically what I'll do is try to highlight what node PRs have been merged. Just general like questions or general discussion about like things going on in the Neovim ecosystem. You can file a PR against GitHub to modify my Neorant. Just let me know what cool things you want highlighted, and I'll highlight them. We highlighted a lot of Folk's plugins when he was like first starting his like plugin spree. Someone just posted the link. Folk did. Favorite LSP code action I see also. Oh wait, are people asking me the same things they asked Folk? Favorite function, quit. I don't know.
No, Lua function. It has to be a new Lua function.
Oh, like new Lua function?
Well, and Vim one. Quit isn't a Lua function. You can't use that. That's cheating.
os.exit or something.
All right, that's fair.
I don't know. I use like buff set lines a lot, I guess.
It's a classic. I like it.
And yeah, I guess a lot of these questions are things, but yeah, favorite code action. I actually don't use code action.
Mine's sort imports in Go, because it just figures out it's like fix imports and just sorts them all and gets all the right stuff and figures out if I imported something, and it just does it magically, which is nice.
Yeah, I think code actions, TJ and I were talking about this, like I just don't get the mental model for them, because when I call definition on something, what I'm calling, I know what the response is going to be. A code action is kind of like vague, like we don't actually know where all the code actions document. Like they don't give us that. You have to request a code action at a certain point. So you may or may not get a code action. Things like LSP lightbulb work by basically always pinging the server for a code action, which is like kind of expensive. The same with like auto completion. It's always pinging the completion results.
Yeah,
so
I think
I don't like mapping that stuff.
It depends on the language, I think, too. Like, we've got CKIP in the chat here. Envim Metals Extraordinaire. Check out his stream to see him making that. They've got a lot of cool code actions for Scala that do magic Scala things that I don't understand because the language is too complicated for me, you know. But so it's like, I think it depends on the you know, language you're using, the LSP and all that kind of stuff. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
We've actually merged a lot of people to improve like Metal and JDTLS's integrations. Like I'd say we're incredibly invested in making that that easy for like plugin authors.
Definitely.
And I see someone asked what my favorite whiskey was, and I'm actually like super into Scotch. So check out Bunnahabhain 12. That's my favorite actually. For something that's like not insanely rare. Yeah.
Nice. Very cool.
Anyway, I should probably defer since there's a lot of other great people that
we'll move on to the tree sitter portion of the day.